Without further ado, well, I didn't even introduce myself. I'm Ibrahim Gomel. I'll be your host today. So I would call on Idris Tawfiq, who is a British Muslim writer and broadcaster. He has a degree in English, language and literature from the University of Manchester. He has also studied sacred theology from Pontifical University in Rome. He was also the head of religious studies in different schools that he has been. And before embracing Islam, he was a Roman Catholic priest. He has been heavily involved in work of interfaith and dialogue. And there's a famous quote that was attributed to him that he used to say, "We should never feel threatened by goodness, regardless of or wherever it comes from." And he's also written so many articles in newspapers and periodicals, both here in the UK and in Egypt. And among his books, there's Guardians of the Light, which maybe some of you have read. There's also a book titled Talking to New Muslims and Calling Others to Islam. He has written so many other books, but time would not warrant me to list them all. So I would like to welcome Mr. Idris Tawfiq to Nottingham to open the talk, and he'll be speaking on human rights.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wassalam ala ashrafil mursaleen Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most compassionate, all praise be to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. Peace and blessings of Allah be upon His final messenger Muhammad. And may the peace and the blessings and the mercy of Almighty God, Allah, be upon each one of you here this evening. You honor me in inviting me to come. I'm delighted to be back. I've not been for a year or two to Nottingham University, but I have very happy memories. In fact, I think you'll even find something on YouTube from me talking in this very room, I seem to remember. It's lovely to see what I remember. I always associate Nottingham University with Malaysian students. So it's lovely to see lots of Malaysian students here. And I also especially greet those people who are not Muslim. You're very, very welcome. Now, our time is limited. I'm going to talk about human rights. When Islam dawned upon the Arabian Peninsula 1400 years ago, it came to turn the world upside down. And it came to set people free. They're two very important things to remember right from the start. Now, as I prepared for this evening, you know, I walked along the seashore where I live thinking, what will I say? And you know, for me, it's not an academic exercise. It really isn't. We can talk about anything, really. I have come, you know, and I want, in some way, to be able to touch people's hearts and to be able to make people think. You know, I've not come to give a lecture to anyone. People say, you know, you give lectures. I don't give lectures to anyone. I've come to share a few thoughts with you. And I asked myself, do I feel, as a Muslim, you know, we're talking about human rights, do I feel free as a Muslim? Because many people, you know, they have images of Islam oppressing women and telling people you can't do this and you mustn't do that, and it must be a very restrictive religion. You've got to do so many things. And I want to start by that question about, do I feel free? Do I feel that my rights as a human being, are in any way curtailed by Islam? Do I feel that my family's rights, or the rights of my friends or the people I know who are Muslim, do I feel that their humanity is in any way diminished by Islam? And the answer is no, I don't. I don't feel that. And so, I throw a little bomb in, right? The good thing about coming and giving a talk is you can say what you want and get out quick. You know, so I'll say my thoughts. If anyone has come to tell me, you know, that Islam diminishes me or stops me being the person that I'm meant to be, well, I don't want to hear that from them, because it doesn't. You know, and sometimes I get rather tired of people who are not Muslim, no offense intended at all, telling me, you know, how Islam does this and it does this and it does this. Islam sets people free. Islam empowers people to make our world a better place. You know, where women who are battered in their homes, it helps us to help them. It helps us to help the poor in our midst. That's what it should be helping us to do. So, I don't feel restricted. I must say right at the start, I don't come here to speak on behalf of tyrants. I'm coming to speak about human rights in Islam. I don't come to speak in the name of those despots and rulers across the world who deny their people the very basic rights that Almighty God has given them. I don't speak on their behalf. Nor do I speak on behalf of those monsters, those psychopathic murderers who are on the television every day, bringing the very name of Islam into disrepute. I don't speak in their name either. I've come to speak very simply on my own behalf to tell you about Islam as I see it. There was once an Islamic State. You know, we hear these monsters, you know, how dare they declare a caliphate. There was once a real Islamic State. In this Islamic State, you know, for those who are not Muslim, just to explain, the Muslims lived in Mecca and Saudi Arabia at first, and they suffered great persecution. And eventually the Muslims moved from Mecca to a town in the north called Yathrib. It eventually became known as Al-Madinah, the town. So they moved from Mecca to this place. And Prophet Muhammad moved with them eventually. Allah Almighty told him, go to the community. And in this was a real Islamic state. This was a real state that we could be proud of. At its heart was the mosque. The mosque was the center of the town. Allah was the head of the town. And Muhammad, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon him, was the leader. So this was the state, this was the Islamic state. And of course, when the Muslims came, there were other tribes living in this town as well. There were Jewish tribes, there were Christian tribes, there were pagan tribes. So they all had to live together in the one place. So they all worked out between themselves a constitution. This year, 2015, this is the 800th anniversary of Magna Carta. 800 years. Well, 1400 years ago, we had the first Magna Carta, and that was the Constitution of Medina. In this formal agreement between all the tribes, between Muslim, Jew, Christian, pagan, they established this between themselves. They all agreed to this. There would be security of the community. It had provided for security of the state. It provided for religious freedoms. More of that anon. It provided Medina, gave Medina a role as a sacred place. It provided for the security of women. This is in the 7th century, by the way. It provided for stable tribal relations, a tax system to support the city in time of conflict, a system for granting protection to the individual, a judicial system for resolving disputes. 1400 years ago. And by abiding by this constitution, or this treaty, this town, this city, thrived. And it really was an Islamic state. And do you know what the hallmark of this state was? The foreign emissaries used to come to visit the head of state, Muhammad, and of course they came expecting him to be sitting on a golden throne, or surrounded by a gold silk rope, or guards, bodyguards, heavily armoured, protecting him. And they'd go looking, they'd go into the mosque to look for him, and they couldn't find any throne, and they'd say, which one is Muhammad? And the people would say, oh, that's him. Oh, you see that one over there praying? Oh, that's him. And they'd say, what, in those shabby clothes? Yeah, that's him. He was the ruler. Rule, authority in this state, in this Islamic state, was typified by service and humility. Human rights in Islam stem from two, and equality. Two basic fundamental principles. Dignity. And by the way, you cannot understand human rights in Islam without God. It is impossible. All of the human rights we believe in as Muslims, they come from God. They're not just agreed upon by different people. They come as gifts from Allah Almighty. And dignity and equality are the two main sources. It's the fundamental right of every human being to dignity. Allah Almighty says, we have honoured the children of Adam. And we have honoured the children of Adam, and carried them by land and sea. We've provided good sustenance for them, and favoured them specially above many of those we've created. So human beings are created with an innate dignity, because they're made by Almighty God, Allah. Their dignity comes from God. And these people who are entitled to dignity are equal. O people, Allah tells us in the Quran, O people, we created you from a single man and a single woman, and made you into nations and tribes so that you should know one another. Verily, the most honoured of you in the sight of Allah is the greatest of you in piety. And Allah is all-knowing, all-aware. And just finally on that theme of equality, in his final sermon, Prophet Muhammad, he spoke to the assembled Muslim nation gathered before him. And he said these words, he said, no Arab, equality, no Arab has any superiority over a non-Arab. Nor does a non-Arab have any superiority over an Arab. Nor does a white man have any superiority over a black man, or the black man any superiority over the white man. You are all the children of Adam, and Adam was created from clay. You see, in Islam, there is no notion of racial superiority. Racial superiority is prohibited in Islam. Discrimination between any group is prohibited in Islam and contradicts its very essence. You know, just pause and step back and look at our experience. When we go into the mosque, you know, there are no kings and princes and presidents in a mosque. All there are in a mosque, there are men and women praying side by side, shoulder to shoulder. I heard a very beautiful idea once. A khutbah was given, and the speaker described this life that we live. He said, it's like a drama. And when the play starts, we're all living a play. And he said, when the play starts, one person is given the costume of a king, and another one is given the costume of a poor man, and another one the costume of an engineer, and another one the costume of a teacher, and another, you see? But when the play ends, all the actors in the drama take off their costumes and go back to exactly what they were at the start, equal in God's eyes. This is what Islam is about. You know, at Hajj, the great pilgrimage that takes place every year, we see Muslims from every nation on earth, you know, blonde and grey and black hair and no hair, yellow skin, brown skin, pink skin, every skin you can think, all the same. All people the same in the sight of Allah. This is what Islam teaches. So what about then, you say, I've not got much time, what you said about women? You said, it's all very well, you're telling us about equality. What about women? Well, I'll tell you about women. Under the laws of Islam, women have these rights established in the 7th century, not in Victorian times, when people were struggling for rights and equalities. In the 7th century, women are entitled to own property and businesses. Women are entitled, they have the right to engage in financial transactions, to vote, to receive inheritance, to obtain education, to participate in legal and political affairs. A woman in Islam has the right to choose her husband. You know, you've seen on the television, forced marriages. There are no forced marriages in Islam. A marriage where a woman is made to marry someone against her will is not recognized as a marriage in Islam. No marriage took place. It isn't a marriage. So those people would have you believe in forced marriage. They're wrong. This cultural backwardness, it is completely wrong. It is forbidden for a woman to be made to marry someone she doesn't want to marry. It's not allowed in Islam. In Islam as well, a woman, just an interesting thought, she doesn't take on the name of her husband as she does in the West. She doesn't become Mrs. Smith. She keeps her name. She keeps her marriage dowry for all her life. It's her own. Any money she earns or she has, she's not required in Islam to give a penny of it to her husband. If she chooses to give it to him, it's written down in her book of deeds as an act of charity. If she chooses from her own money to pay for some of the food for the family table, it's written down as a charity. That's what Islam says of women. So that if the marriage should end, she's financially secure. She's not dependent on her husband. However, let's be frank. Just as many Western societies still fight against prejudice and discrimination, it's a two-way street, this. You know, the West isn't perfect. Just as the West, it extols ideas, but just as it suffers from prejudice and discrimination. So there are many Muslim societies struggling to implement fully the rights outlined in Islam. Islam is perfect. I mean, I could give you talks on that until the end of the semester, but Muslims aren't. Allah Almighty says, if any do deeds of righteousness, be they male or female, and have faith, they'll enter heaven, and not the least injustice will be done to them. Muslims are entitled, it is their right, we talk about human rights, all people have this right. Allah Almighty says, nor take life, they have the right to life and security, nor take life which Allah has made sacred, except for just cause. If anyone kills a person, unless in retribution for murder or spreading corruption in the land, it is as if he kills all mankind. While if he saves a life, it's as if he saves the life of all mankind. This is what Islam has to say. Even in war, we are required, Muslims are required to deal with the enemy nobly on the battlefield. This nonsense we see on the television of people being burned alive in cages, this is repulsive to Islam and Muslims. This isn't of Islam. Burning people and cutting their heads off. When Muslims see this on the television, it's like a dagger in our stomachs. Islam doesn't allow this well, it isn't even animal behavior. Animals wouldn't do that. Torture and mutilation are forbidden in Islam in any war. In fact, the rules for a war, for fighting in defense of Islam or on behalf of Islam, are so stringent that not even animals or plants may be harmed. The army may not even harm plants on the ground. This is the rule of Islam. These are the rights that we give to the world. An Islamic State, let's look at freedom of belief. An Islamic State is not only obliged to permit, but to respect diversity. Non-Muslims are allowed to worship in accordance with their religion if they live in an Islamic State. Let there be no compulsion in religion is of the essence of Islam, the very essence of it. And those who would tell you otherwise are wrong. The Jews, for example, in the year 637, when the Muslims entered Jerusalem, the Jews were invited back after 500 years of exile to worship freely in Jerusalem. When the Muslims re-entered Jerusalem after the Crusades in 1187, the Christians were invited back. And a treaty was made with the Christian patriarch Sophronius, in which the rights of the Christians was guaranteed. Their right to worship, the right of their property wouldn't be touched. If they chose not to stay, they'd be given compensation for their churches and so on. In Al-Andalus, you know, in that golden age we talk about of Islam in Spain, Christian, Muslim and Jew lived together in the Muslim court, advising the ruler. People allowed to worship freely and advise the ruler. There was no discrimination against them. Muslims are we could talk maybe at some stage about this, let there be no compulsion in religion. We could have an interesting discussion about that applying to Muslims as well as non-Muslims. Let there be no compulsion in religion. Remember when in the city of Medina in those early days, people they'd become Muslim, And then some of them gave up their new religion and went back to what they used to be before. And a penalty was prescribed for that. A death penalty was prescribed. But it wasn't prescribed because they'd given up their religion. It was prescribed because they were committing treason. They were committing treason against the state. And any nation, including our own, has that same penalty, death for treason. We can discuss at another time, because there's no penalty prescribed for actually giving up your religion. Justice is a basic right. You who believe, be steadfast in your devotion to Allah and bear witness impartially. Do not let hatred of others lead you away from justice, but adhere to justice, for that is closer to awareness of God. Be mindful of Allah. If in Palestine the Jews were being persecuted, it would be the duty of Muslims to go to their defense. That's what we're required to do. Justice, whether it's people we want to help or we don't want to help, people who are being persecuted, we are required to help them. So the time is almost ended. You know, Islam, 20 minutes on human rights. Islam, I would have you believe, is beautiful and gentle and sweet. It's so beautiful that it would make grown men weep because of its beauty. It's not only beautiful, gentle and sweet, it's exciting and empowering. You know, Muslims who haven't experienced that, our beloved Prophet ﷺ, said that the one who has not tasted the sweetness and goodness of Islam in this world will not taste its sweetness and goodness in the next. And you know, I think he was talking about Muslims. There are many Muslims who have never tasted the beauty of Islam. May Allah bless them for their observance and for their adherence to His will. But Islam is beautiful. Islam puts a spring in your step and makes you a better person. You know, the final thought, in the USA there used to be, I don't know if there still is, a poster for the US Marines. And it showed a picture of a Marine dressed in whatever they're dressed in, pointing at you, and the poster said, "Be the best you can be. Join the US Marines." Well, I've not come to speak on behalf of the US Marines, but I've got a different poster for you. Be the best you can be. Become a Muslim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.